Hello and welcome to this Philbert Flies review of SimWing's Munich scenery for Microsoft Flight Simulator, published by Aerosoft. You join me here on approach to runway 26 right in the A320 NEO with the fly-by-wire A320 mod. I'm starting with an approach to give you a look at the surrounding area and the opportunity to gauge the performance of this add-on on my system, which is an i7-8700K processor with 32GB of RAM and a 1080 Ti graphics card. You can find my current graphics settings in my YouTube channel's community page. On the subject of performance, you will notice one or two stutters on this approach. I would say this airport has slightly more of a performance hit on my system than other similar sized add-on airports, but it's nothing overly concerning and your mileage may vary. Anyway, I'll let you finish watching the landing in peace, I'll show you a little bit of the taxi in, and I'll speak to you again at a gate from where we'll have a good look around this scenery together in different weather and lighting conditions.
100, 50, 40, 30, 20, retard, 5.
Welcome to Munich. We're parked up here, as you can see, on stand 208, and we'll have a quick look at the jetway connecting, then move on to taking a tour around the airport. So the animation's nice and smooth, and as you can see, the jetway hood attaches to the aircraft perfectly, which is very nice to see. And while we're here, let's take a look at the modelling of the jetway itself. A custom model, of course, and very nicely done. We've got tinted transparent windows with some advertising on the outside, and these look very realistic. You can, of course, go inside the jetway. The glass does disappear, but I've spoken before about the difficulties developers have with creating transparent glass that looks good from both sides. Moving on now to the terminal building. We'll take a quick look at the texturing outside and then move inside to see what interior detail has been included. So the textures themselves are not the highest resolution I've ever seen. That's particularly noticeable down here with the signs on this doorway. But from a reasonable distance away, and certainly from an aircraft cockpit, they look very good. Nice and crisp. We have a good amount of weathering. There's a little bit of repetition in the weathering. If you look closely, you'll notice that these drips appear in every other panel, which is a little bit of a shame. But again, that's the sort of thing that I will notice touring around an airport in the drone to do a review, and that you probably won't in day-to-day operations. The roofs of the buildings are somewhat lower resolution, and that's something I would have expected to see. You have to use low resolution textures in some places, otherwise you suffer a huge hit on performance. It's really nice to see these wire mesh, or metal mesh I should say, sunshade type things on the outside of the terminal. These look very realistic even from up close. And if we go inside the building, you'll notice that there's a reasonable amount of interior modelling. We've got some seats, we've got some gate desks, and while the carpet texture and the ceiling texture are not the sharpest, this looks really good from outside, and it looks pretty passable from within as well. We have lost the glass from the windows from the inside, just as we did on the jetways, but that isn't such an issue here because of this wire mesh. This is the Terminal 2 satellite, and you'll notice we've got a good amount of detailing on the jetway structures, including these Lufthansa logos. They are a little bit jagged around the edge. It's a pity they're not rounder, but it's a very minor point, and it's nice to see they're included. Again, the quality of the modelling and the texturing is very good, and we've got a good amount of interior detail included on all three levels. This apron control tower on the roof of the Terminal 2 satellite is very nicely modelled, with a good amount of detail included, including this animated radar at the top here. It does look a little bit clean and sterile, and it does of course use flat textures as opposed to transparent glass. This is the landside entrance to Terminal 2, and while the level of detailing and the quality of the ground textures aren't going to blow you away, they've done a reasonably good job of modelling it, and they've included some nice details, including these banners here, advertising hoardings, parked cars and so forth. This outdoor courtyard area in between the two terminals is nothing to write home about either. While they've done a reasonable job of modelling the buildings around the outside and the flat textures look okay, if you come down to the lower level here, you'll notice a lot of repetition with Terminal 2 signs all the way around, and this Sportalm building makes an appearance on every side of the square. This is the landside entrance to Terminal 1, and while the ground textures are a little blurry and the building textures a little repetitive as we see here, there are one or two nice details included, like these tables and canopies down in front of the building there. But back to where it really matters, the airside parts of Terminal 1 look very good. They look every bit as good as Terminal 2 did, with extensive use of transparent glass and a good amount of interior detail as well. The main control tower is modelled quite nicely, but again we don't have any transparent glass and the textures are somewhat repetitive, as you can see. There's also no weathering on the outside, so it does look a little bit Toy Towny. This giant Lufthansa Technik hangar towards the western end of the airport is actually one of the most impressive buildings in the scenery in my opinion. It's very nicely modelled, beautifully textured with a good amount of grime and weathering, and the windows look fantastic as well. They've used texturing on top of transparent glass to create a very, very convincing glass effect. You'll even notice that we have ground markings inside, which is really nice to see, and a good amount of interior detail. The cargo terminal is very nicely modelled and textured as well, although it's a little bit disappointing to see flat textures used in place of transparent glass on this canopy here. And I'd also say that the ground textures beyond the apron itself don't look a lot like the real thing. I'd also quite like to see a little bit more life around the place. Cargo terminals tend to be very busy, bustling places with a huge number of containers and other things around the place, and this one just feels a little bit devoid of life. And having touched briefly on ground textures at the cargo terminal, let's talk a bit more broadly about the ground in this scenery. I would say it's alright. It's not amazing. The textures are a little bit blurry if you get close to them, and they're also slightly too uniform for me. Now you will notice some imperfections, some dots and different colours and things like that, but if we take a broader view, they kind of all look a bit samey to me. Now perhaps I'm being super critical, perhaps that's unfair, but you'll definitely notice a repeating pattern in these concrete tiles along here, for example. And while we have some rubber marks around the taxiway lines, they're not particularly variable, and therefore for me they're not as realistic as some I've seen. The ground markings, by and large, are pretty good. They're nice and crisp, they're not too bright and cartoony, they look about right. Although, again, there is a certain uniformity that to me isn't as realistic as it could be. While we're talking about the ground, it would be remiss of me not to point out these taxiway bridges over the roads. Simwings have done a great job here. I've seen other developers try and fail to create these convincingly in previous sims, and these look really pretty good. You will notice that the cars going up this slope over here drive into the ground, and also if you look very carefully, the cars here drive into a black hole and disappear. But as far as I'm aware, that is a simulator limitation. I don't imagine there's anything Simwings could have done about that. The runways at this airport look really very good indeed. The markings are accurate, the materials used are accurate, the colours are accurate, and the amount of rubber marking around the touchdown zone is pretty accurate as well. So great job here. The grassy areas by and large look okay. They're not the best I've seen, but they're not the worst. There are some areas where the ground looks pretty blurry if you get up close, but the overall effect on approach is pretty convincing. And the taxiway signs are done very nicely. They're nice and crisp and well modelled. The airport looks really pretty good by night, with these floodlights creating a convincing glow across the apron, and the terminal lighting from within looking really convincing as well. You'll notice that the windows retain their tint even at night time, preventing the bright, unrealistic glare that we've seen in some other sceneries. There are one or two anomalies, like these pools of light over the roadway, which don't appear to have a light source creating them, but that's a very small point and not something you're likely to notice day to day. Even the areas without transparent glass look pretty good, with the flat window textures they've used creating a pretty convincing impression of a lit interior. The taxiway lights have been very nicely done, with each of the coloured taxiway centre lines having the appropriate coloured lights. They look very, very realistic. I'm a particular fan of these edge lights over the bridges. They look very nice, and I like the way they create a pool of blue light around them. And the runways are very nicely lit as well. Here's Munich in the rain, and it looks very, very nice. The ground textures support the default reflections and puddles very nicely. You will unfortunately see a lot of popping glass which isn't shrouded in low visibility as it should be, but of course, as I've said before, there's nothing developers can do about that. It's something that Asobo needs to fix. It's just unfortunate that at this airport there are huge glass frontages to all of the terminal buildings, so it is more noticeable than in most add-ons. And here's Munich in the snow. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? Now, it isn't really fair to compare this add-on with previous add-ons that I've reviewed, because I know that Asobo have made some big inroads into improving the implementation of snow with the most recent sim update. But I will point out things that I like here. I like the fact that there are no surfaces that seem to be uncovered due to the textures used. I like the fact that ground markings are partially covered in snow. And I like the overall effect. It does look like an airport should look, in my opinion, after a heavy snowfall. The one exception to this is the runways, which are also blanketed in snow. And I don't know whether or not this is within a developer's power to fix, but I would have expected to see them at least clear. So, Simwings Munich, what's the verdict? Well, I quite like it. I think a lot of things have been done very well. The buildings are well modelled, the night lighting looks very realistic indeed, particularly the taxiway lights and the terminal interiors when viewed from outside. It's great to see Simwings incorporating transparent glass and doing such a good job of it. I was very impressed with the detail in the maintenance area, and I was also very impressed with the snow implementation. For such a huge airport, the attention to detail is laudable. That said, the ground textures are not the best. They're a little bit on the blurry side and noticeably repetitive. The building textures are a little bit repetitive too. I also noticed a performance hit on approach, while taxiing and while moving around in the drone. This wasn't a showstopper though, and as I said at the beginning, your mileage may vary depending on your system, your graphics settings and the whims of the simulator. I can only compare performance to what I get at other similar sized add-on airports. Overall, I think the developers have done a good job here, but I don't think this is a scenery that's going to blow you away with its realism. Simwings are getting better at what they do all the time, and this add-on is a significant step up from Ibiza, the last of their sceneries that I reviewed. But it still lacks a certain something that the very best scenery developers provide. I can't quite put my finger on why, but it doesn't truly feel like you're there. It'll be interesting to see how Gaia's Munich compares to this one. I suspect there will be certain things they do better, but also certain things they do worse. So I hope you found this useful. If you have, do please click the thumbs up button and subscribe to my channel for more. As well as reviews, I produce the odd tutorial video and I do regular live streams. It would be great to see you on one of those sometime. Thanks very much for watching, have a very Merry Christmas if Christmas is your thing and you're watching this soon after it's published, and I'll see you on the other side. Take care, bye bye.